I used to believe patience could smooth anything, that if I loved hard enough, I could stitch a blended family into something seamless. When I married Mark, I promised myself I would never be the stereotype, never the stepmother who competed or resented. Olivia was 16 then, sharp and distant, already taller than me and painfully aware of it. I tried to meet her where she was, smiling through clenched hope. When the twins came later, Noah and Lucas, tiny and red and perfect, I told myself love multiplied. I didn't notice how often I was swallowing the ache inside. Olivia never said outright that she disliked me, but contempt has a sound if you listen closely. It was in the way she sighed when I entered rooms, the way her eyes skimmed past the twins like they were furniture. She called me by my first name, clipped and flat. Never mom, never anything warm. Mark insisted it was teenage adjustment, grief, hormones. I nodded because it was easier. I cooked her favorite meals, drove her to practices, paid for extra tutoring. Each kindness felt like dropping coins into a well that never echoed back, no matter how hard inside. When I found out I was pregnant, Olivia stopped speaking to me for weeks. She spoke to Mark, 2 friends, 2 walls, but not to me. After Noah and Lucas were born, she stared at them with something sharp and unreadable. I told myself it was fear of being replaced. I doubled down instead of pulling back. I set up a college fund for her, insisted on covering tuition when she got into her dream university. Mark couldn't afford it alone. I could. I told myself generosity would eventually soften her and make us feel like family someday together again. People like to pretend money doesn't matter emotionally, but it does when it's yours. I took extra shifts, delayed my own career plans, justified every sacrifice as an investment in peace. Olivia accepted it all without thanks, without acknowledgement. She called to complain about professors, roommates, deadlines. Never once did she ask how the twins were sleeping or how I was holding up. When Mark said I should stop trying so hard, I heard failure in his voice, not concern. I kept going because stopping felt like admitting defeat to myself and to the family. I wanted to survive whole. The twins grew, laughing and grabbing at Olivia whenever she visited. She recoiled like they were sticky. At birthdays, she showed up late, stayed glued to her phone, left early. I noticed the way relatives watched me, sympathetic smiles that said I should try harder. I carried that weight quietly. At night, rocking Noah while Lucas slept, I wondered if love could actually run out. I hated myself for thinking it. Mothers aren't supposed to keep score. Stepmothers apparently are supposed to absorb everything without complaint, without reward, without recognition, without rest, until there's nothing left inside them at all. Mark tried in his own passive way. He hated conflict, especially with Olivia. Whenever I brought up her behavior, he'd rub his temples and say she'd grow out of it. I stopped pushing because every conversation ended with me apologizing for being sensitive. It chipped away at me. I started feeling like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around her moods. The twins sensed tension, clinging to me when she was near. I told myself endurance was love. I didn't realize endurance was erasing me slowly, quietly, painfully, day by day, until something broke without warning or mercy inside. The breaking point didn't come with fireworks. It came on a Sunday afternoon, my kitchen smelling like roast chicken and lemon cleaner. We were all together, rare and tense. Olivia sat at the counter scrolling, earbuds dangling. Mark carved meat. The twins banged spoons against the table, squealing. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the sense that one wrong word could shatter the moment. I kept smiling, serving plates, pretending this was normal. Underneath, something in me was bracing, waiting for the inevitable crack I somehow knew was coming soon and feared more than anything else that day. I didn't know yet what Olivia would say, or how deeply it would cut. I only knew the air felt brittle, like winter glass. I remember looking at Noah's sticky fingers and Lucas's crooked grin, thinking how small they still were, how much they needed me. Olivia finally looked up, eyes cold and sharp, lips pressed like she'd rehearsed something. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Whatever peace I'd been buying, whatever patience I'd been hoarding, was about to be tested. And this time, I wasn't sure I could swallow it again without losing something important inside myself forever after. I didn't realize how quiet the room had become until Olivia pulled out one earbud and smirked at the twins. She laughed under her breath, sharp and humorless, then looked straight at me. "You know," she said, dragging the words like she wanted them to sting, "my life would have been so much better if they'd never been born." Mark froze mid. The knife clinked against the plate. My body reacted before my brain did, heat flooding my face, fingers going numb. For a split second, I thought I'd misheard her, that my mind was twisting things out of fear. Then she rolled her eyes and shrugged, sealing it. Those words hung in the air, ugly and heavy, pressing down on my chest until breathing felt optional. I remember the sound of my own pulse roaring, drowning out everything else. My hands gripped the counter so hard my nails bent backward, pain blooming but barely registering. I stared at Olivia, searching her face for regret, for a joke, for anything that said she didn't mean it. There was nothing, just annoyance, like she'd commented on bad weather. Mark finally looked at me, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing uselessly. He said her name softly, like a warning, but didn't tell her she was wrong. That silence hit me harder than her words. It told me exactly how alone I was in that moment. Olivia scoffed and crossed her arms, clearly annoyed the room hadn't moved on. "It's just the truth," she said. "Ever since they showed up, everything's about them. Dad barely notices me anymore." Each word felt like a blade turned slowly. I wanted to scream that love wasn't a limited resource, that I'd spent years trying to prove she mattered. Instead, my throat closed. My gaze drifted to Noah smearing mashed potatoes into his hair, Lucas laughing at nothing, innocent and oblivious. A primal instinct surged through me then, fierce and undeniable. These were my children. No one got to wish them erased and walk away untouched. I picked Noah up without thinking, my arms shaking, Lucas pressing his face into my leg. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, every beat screaming, "Protect, protect, protect." I told Olivia, very quietly, that she was being cruel. She laughed, actually laughed, and said I was dramatic. Mark told her to calm down, still not saying the words I needed him to say. Something inside me cracked then, a thin, invisible line snapping. I realized this wasn't a bad day or a misunderstanding. This was who she was willing to be, and who he was willing to enable. Olivia grabbed her bag and stormed out, muttering under her breath about how unfair everyone was. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. The twins started crying, startled by the noise, their little faces scrunching in fear. I sank into a chair, pulling them close, rocking instinctively as tears slid down my cheeks without permission. Mark hovered, unsure, offering weak reassurances that she didn't mean it like that. I couldn't even look at him. Her words replayed over and over, echoing in my skull. Wished they were never born. The cruelty of it hollowed me out, leaving behind something cold and resolute. That night, after the house finally went quiet, I sat on the floor of the nursery between the cribs. The moonlight spilled across the blankets, silver and soft, mocking how shattered I felt. I kept replaying every moment I'd excused, every slight I'd forgiven, wondering how I'd let it get this far. I felt stupid for thinking money and patience could buy decency. I held Lucas's tiny hand and promised him silently that no one would ever make him feel unwanted. The promise settled deep in my bones, heavier than fear, stronger than guilt. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, Olivia's voice cut through the dark. By morning, something had shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and aching, but beneath it was clarity. I thought about tuition payments scheduled for the next month, about the sacrifices I'd normalized. I imagined my sons growing up hearing they were burdens. The thought made my stomach twist violently. I realized boundaries weren't punishments, they were protection. For the first time since marrying Mark, I considered what it would look like to stop cushioning everyone else at my own expense. When Mark came into the kitchen that morning, rubbing sleep from his eyes, I knew the conversation we were avoiding was coming. He started with an apology that sounded rehearsed, said Olivia was stressed, said families say things they don't mean. I listened, arms folded tight around myself, feeling strangely calm. I told him I loved him, but loving him didn't mean accepting cruelty toward our children. His face fell as I spoke, realization dawning slowly. I didn't threaten or yell. I simply said something had to change. As he stood there silent, I felt a resolve settle in, steady and unmovable. The line had been crossed, and I wasn't stepping back over it again. In that quiet moment, I understood this wasn't about punishing Olivia, or proving a point, or winning some twisted family battle. It was about drawing a boundary so clear it could not be ignored. My heart still hurt, but it no longer felt directionless. It had a purpose. Now, as the twins babbled behind me, alive and wanted and loved, I made a silent vow to myself. No matter how uncomfortable it became, I would not bankroll my own erasure. And I would not teach my children that their existence was negotiable. That realization frightened me, but it also felt like breathing fresh air after years underwater. I didn't know the cost yet, but I knew I was finally ready to pay it. For the first time, protecting myself felt inseparable from protecting them. And that truth settled my shaking hands. I didn't look back, despite everything I had lost. The days after felt heavier than the words themselves. Olivia didn't call. She didn't text. Not an apology, not a defensive explanation, nothing. The silence felt intentional, like a punishment meant to make me cave. Mark paced more than usual, his phone always face up on the counter, flinching whenever it buzzed. I watched him struggle and felt sympathy, but it didn't erase the ache sitting behind my sternum. Every quiet hour reinforced what she'd said, what she'd meant, what she still hadn't taken back. When she finally did reach out, it wasn't to me. Mark took the call in the garage, voice low, door shut like he was hiding contraband. I could hear fragments through the thin walls. You can't say things like that. Pause. No, she's not overreacting. Another pause. His shoulders slumped. When he came back inside, his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He said Olivia was stressed, overwhelmed, that she felt pushed aside. I waited for him to say she was wrong. He didn't. My jaw tightened until it ached. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, slicing shadows across the room. I replayed every dollar I'd transferred, every bill I'd quietly paid. Tuition, housing, books, groceries when she called short on cash. I remembered her casual thank yous, always rushed, always distracted. I'd told myself gratitude didn't matter. Now it felt like proof. I imagined wiring the next payment while hearing her voice wishing my children erased. My stomach twisted so hard I had to sit up. I pressed my palm against my chest, grounding myself in the thud of my heart. The next morning, Olivia called me directly. Her voice was clipped, irritated. "Dad says you're upset," she said, like I'd misplaced my keys. I told her I wasn't upset. I was hurt. There was a pause, then a dismissive laugh. "I was just being honest," she said. "You're too sensitive." The words landed with familiar cruelty. No apology, no reflection. Just justification. I felt something detach inside me, a final thread snapping cleanly instead of fraying. I asked her if she understood what it meant to say that about children. About her brothers, she sighed loudly, like I was inconveniencing her. "You chose to have them," she said. "That wasn't my choice." The entitlement in her tone made my hands tremble. I ended the call before I said something unforgivable. I sat there afterward, phone still warm in my hand, realizing this wasn't immaturity. This was character, and character had consequences, whether she liked it or not. Mark tried again that evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table after the twins were asleep. His voice was soft, cautious. He asked if we could give Olivia time. I looked at him, really looked, and saw how badly he wanted the problem to disappear. I told him time wouldn't change words that had already been spoken. I told him love didn't mean unlimited access to my resources while disrespecting my children. Saying it out loud made my throat tight, but it also felt solid, real. He asked what I was suggesting. The question hung between us, fragile. I said I was done paying her tuition. The words echoed in the quiet kitchen. Mark's chair scraped back as he stood abruptly, disbelief etched across his face. "You can't do that," he said. "She's my daughter." I nodded, heart pounding, and told him exactly that. She was his daughter, not my financial responsibility. Not when she wished harm through erasure on our sons. The guilt tried to rise then, familiar and sharp. I pictured Olivia scrambling, angry, telling people her stepmother ruined her life. I pictured family members whispering. I breathed through it. I reminded myself guilt wasn't always a sign of wrongdoing. Sometimes it was just the cost of finally choosing yourself. I told Mark I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because boundaries only matter when they cost something. My voice shook, but I didn't take it back. He sat down slowly, running his hands through his hair. He said we'd have to talk to her together. I agreed. Not because I needed his permission, but because I wanted him to witness the line being drawn. That night, after he went to bed, I opened my laptop and stared at the tuition portal. The numbers glowed back at me, impersonal and cold. I didn't click anything yet. I wasn't acting impulsively. This wasn't rage. This was resolve. I spent the next day watching the twins, memorizing the way Noah laughed when Lucas fell over, the way Lucas insisted on holding my finger with his whole fist. I thought about the example I was setting. What would they learn if I kept sacrificing myself for someone who resented their existence? The answer settled heavily. They would learn they were optional. That love required erasure. I refused that lesson with every fiber of my being. When Olivia came home that weekend, the air crackled with tension. She walked in like nothing had changed, dropping her bag, heading straight for the fridge. I called her name. She turned, arms crossed, defiant. Mark stood beside me, silent. My heart hammered, but my spine stayed straight. I told her I loved her, but love didn't mean tolerating cruelty. I told her I would no longer be paying her tuition. Her eyes widened, shock flashing into fury in seconds. She started yelling immediately, accusing me of favoritism, of manipulation, of ruining her future. I listened, hands clasped tightly to keep from shaking. When she finally paused, breathless, I said quietly that words have weight, and hers had crushed something that couldn't be rebuilt with money. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. I didn't fully recognize myself either. But as the twins babbled upstairs, safe and unaware, I felt something rare bloom beneath the fear. Certainty. I had chosen them. I had chosen myself, and for the first time, I didn't feel like apologizing for it. Olivia's reaction didn't stop at shouting. It metastasized. She paced the living room, hands flying, voice cracking as she told Mark I was controlling, vindictive, jealous. Each accusation landed like a slap. Not because it was true, but because I could hear how badly she wanted it to be. I stayed seated, palms pressed together, feeling the vibration of her anger in my bones. When she finally turned to me and demanded I explain myself, her eyes were glossy and wild. I felt strangely calm. I told her I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting my children. The room went still, the words heavier than all her yelling combined. She scoffed and said I was overreacting to one stupid comment. I asked her if she'd say that to Noah or Lucas when they were old enough to understand. She opened her mouth, then shut it, jaw tightening. Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me. I pressed on, voice steady, explaining that wishing someone had never existed wasn't a mistake. It was a belief spoken aloud. Her face flushed red, and she screamed that I'd never understand because I wasn't her real mother. The word real sliced cleanly, but I didn't bleed. I just nodded, accepting the truth she'd finally admitted. She stormed upstairs, slamming doors, grabbing things, threatening to leave. Mark followed her, voices muffled but heated. I sat alone on the couch, listening to the house creak and groan around me. My heart ached, but it didn't waver. I felt grief for what we'd never be, for the version of family I'd chased so long. But beneath that grief was relief, quiet and grounding. I had stopped begging for scraps of decency. I had stopped financing my own erasure. That mattered more than peace built on silence. The calls started the next day. First from Mark's sister, then his mother. Concerned voices wrapped in judgment. They asked how I could do this, how I could jeopardize Olivia's future over hurt feelings. I listened politely, then explained calmly what Olivia had said. The line always went quiet after that. Some doubled down anyway, suggesting forgiveness, urging me to be the bigger person. I thanked them for their opinions and held my boundary. Each call ended with my hands shaking less than the last. Practice, I realized, made strength easier. Olivia blasted me on social media, vague posts about betrayal and evil stepmothers. Friends unfollowed me. A few messaged privately, offering quiet support. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to. Every night I tucked my twins into bed, kissed their warm foreheads, and felt grounded again. Mark struggled, caught between guilt and dawning understanding. One evening, he admitted he'd failed to shut her down when it mattered. Hearing that acknowledgement loosened something tight in my chest. It didn't erase the damage, but it showed growth. When tuition deadlines passed and the money didn't come, reality hit Olivia hard. She called, screaming, crying, bargaining. She promised to apologize, to take it back. I listened, heart heavy, but resolute. I told her apologies weren't transactions, that wishing my children away wasn't something money could erase. Her sobs turned to rage again, and the call ended abruptly. I cried afterward, alone in the bathroom, muffling the sound with a towel. Doing the right thing didn't feel good. It felt necessary. There was a difference I was finally learning to honor. Weeks passed. The house grew quieter, calmer. Mark stepped up more with the twins, intentional and present. We really talked about boundaries and loyalty and what family meant now. It wasn't easy. Some nights were raw and painful, but they were honest. I felt seen in a way I hadn't before. Olivia moved out, taking a job, figuring things out the hard way. I heard updates through Mark, each one tinged with resentment and reluctant reality. She was learning that actions carried weight, even when she hated the lesson. One afternoon, while pushing the twins on the swings, I felt something unexpected bloom in my chest. Peace. The sun was warm, their laughter pure and unburdened. No tension, no bracing for cruelty, just presence. I realized then that justice wasn't loud or vindictive. It was quiet alignment. It was choosing not to subsidize harm. It was teaching, by example, that love didn't mean self-betrayal. Olivia's words had changed everything, but not in the way she'd intended. They'd forced me to choose. And in choosing, I'd finally found my footing. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt validated. I'd been tested and I hadn't folded. The cost was real, the fallout messy, but the clarity was worth it. As the twins leaned into me, warm and real and undeniably here, I knew I'd done what needed to be done. Some lines, once crossed, demand consequence. And some boundaries, once drawn, become the foundation for a life that finally feels safe. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest edges, not by erasing them, but by making them easier to hold. Months passed after Olivia moved out, and the silence she left behind felt different than before. It wasn't weaponized anymore. It was neutral. The house breathed again. Mornings were no longer tight with anticipation of conflict. I woke to the sound of Noah babbling to himself, Lucas thumping his feet against the crib rails, sunlight spilling across the floor like a promise I hadn't known I was waiting for the first time in years. I didn't brace myself before getting out of bed. Olivia didn't disappear from our lives entirely. She existed at a distance now, orbiting through Mark in updates and strained phone calls. She took out loans. She worked long shifts. Reality pressed in hard. And from what I heard, it humbled her in ways lectures never could. She never apologized directly. Not really. Once, she sent a text that said she didn't mean it like that. I stared at the screen for a long time, then put the phone down. Some things require more than softened language. They require ownership. I didn't chase it anymore. Mark changed too. Guilt has a way of cracking people open if they let it. He became more present, more vocal, quicker to shut things down when boundaries were tested. One night, sitting at the kitchen table while the twins slept, he admitted he'd been afraid to lose Olivia, so he'd risked losing me instead. Hearing him say it hurt, but it also mattered. Accountability does that. It doesn't undo the past, but it reshapes the future. We didn't magically heal. We worked slowly, honestly together. I watched myself change in small, unexpected ways. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. When relatives brought up Olivia with pointed looks or loaded sighs, I met their eyes and spoke calmly, clearly. I didn't justify, I didn't defend, I simply stated the truth. Some people drifted away, others surprised me by staying. I learned who respected me when I stopped performing for approval. That lesson settled deep, altering how I moved through the world. The twins grew louder, bolder, messier. They filled the house with chaos and joy in equal measure. Sometimes I'd catch them playing together, heads bent close, sharing some secret language only they understood, and my chest would ache with gratitude. I thought about how close they'd come to being treated like collateral damage in someone else's pain. The thought still made my stomach twist. Protecting them hadn't just been instinct. It had been a responsibility I finally honored without hesitation. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found an old receipt from Olivia's tuition tucked into a book. For a moment, guilt flared, familiar and sharp. Then it passed. I remembered the woman I'd been when I paid that bill, desperate to be accepted, terrified of being the villain. I wished I could tell her that being the villain in someone else's story doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it means you stopped letting yourself be the casualty. I tore the receipt in half and threw it away without ceremony. Olivia came by once, months later, to pick up a box she'd left behind. The interaction was stiff, careful. She looked older somehow, more guarded. She glanced at the twins playing on the floor and hesitated. For a split second, I thought she might say something real. She didn't. She grabbed the box and left. I watched from the doorway, heart steady. Not hopeful, not bitter, just accepting. Closure doesn't always come wrapped in apologies. Sometimes it comes as peace without reconciliation. At night, after the house settled, I reflected on everything that had shifted. I thought about fairness, about how often women are expected to absorb cruelty quietly for the sake of harmony. I thought about how easily love becomes leverage when boundaries are unclear. Cutting off tuition hadn't been revenge in the way people like to imagine. It hadn't been fueled by rage or spite. It had been a correction, a consequence aligned with values. That distinction mattered to me more than anyone else's opinion. I don't regret my decision. Not on the hard days. Not on the quiet ones. I regret the years I spent believing endurance was the same as love. I regret modeling self-erasure as virtue. But regret is only useful if it changes you. It changed me. It made me braver, clearer, more willing to choose discomfort over resentment. My children will grow up knowing their existence is not conditional. That alone was worth everything. Sometimes karma isn't dramatic. It doesn't always announce itself with fireworks and public apologies. Sometimes it's quieter. It's watching someone face the natural consequences of their words. It's reclaiming your peace. It's standing in your kitchen, listening to your children laugh, and realizing you're no longer afraid. I didn't win anything in the traditional sense, but I gained something far more valuable, self-respect. And in the end, that was the justice I needed.